and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this City Council meeting on August 14th. We shall have roll call, please, Carolina.
Okay. Councilmember Correll?
Yes.
Salvi?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Gullickson?
Yes.
Mayor Wallace?
Yes. Once again, we shall start with Mayor Waller's quote for the day, and this one actually was kind of earmarked for our volunteers that are going to be coming up, I guess, later, so maybe I was a little bit premature in this, but it comes from Maya Angelou, but it speaks to volunteerism and people that kind of donate and volunteer their time. It goes like this. I've learned that you shouldn't go through life with a catcher's mitt on both hands. You need to be able to throw something back. So we can move on with our tonight's agenda. I guess I would like to add an item B under other business. We need to set a date for our performance review for our city manager. We had the initial, and I think her 1-year anniversary was on July 18th, and we kind of blew right past that. So I would like to congratulate you on your first year.
Thank you.
So do we have any other motions, or any other items or additions or corrections anybody like to add before we entertain a motion? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We shall move on to the citizens' comments portion of our meeting, and tonight we have an invited guest. Elizabeth Weifel is with the Coalition of Greater Minnesotas, and she is going to present to us the latest and greatest.
Great. Were you able to?
I didn't have it, so
Alright, that's
yeah.
fine.
Sort of
I'll just kind of wing it from here. So, I'll just hand that to you, pass that down. So, right here?
Just by the microphone, so the
Thank
you know.
you. I appreciate it, and thank you, Mayor and Rebecca. It's great to be here. I think most of you know it, but in case anyone doesn't, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities is an organization of, actually, I think we're close to 120 cities right now. Morris has been part of the organization for as long as I can remember, but we've been gaining new members across the state. And we work together on issues that unite Greater Minnesota, including local government aid, environment and energy work, economic development, transportation, annexation, land use, and labor and employment. And we go out and visit our cities during the summer, both to talk about how the session went and also to talk a little bit about what we're going to have going forward, as well as, hear from you if there's anything you think we need to be working on. This was a session. If you could see the slide, it said that the session, started with low expectations, and I've been telling everybody, the session started with low expectations, but they couldn't even meet those. It was a very challenging legislative session. I'm going to be honest, it feels like it was a year ago, but it was only back in May that it ended. I think there was a number of different things that sort of contributed to that. We faced a situation where the November forecast looked like we couldn't be spending a lot of money. I think that there was a lot of things that had to be fixed from last year, ranging from the tax bill fix to making the SRO fixes, making changes to cannabis. And there was a short list of priorities going into this session. It was a traditional year for bonding, should have happened. We anticipated there could be some constitutional amendments getting added to the ballot as well, and expected policy. And the other sort of twist that we faced this year is we had a new Senate majority leader because Senator Dietzig had to, she didn't retire from the Senate, but she did step down from that position because of her ongoing battle with cancer. So a lot of changes going in. And sort of going into the budget forecast, as you may remember, in 2023, we had, projected a really large budget surplus, and that was the budget year. Traditionally, the even year isn't even the budget year, but sometimes it will still get talked about during the budget year is the odd year, the even year is the bonding year. It still gets talked about sometimes because there's a desire for supplemental funding. And sort of looking at the session, there was a projected budget surplus, but there was also concern that sort of going forward, we might be starting to see a deficit. We won't honestly know that until November. We'll get a better sense of that, but there is a concern because they have added inflation back into the forecast. If you've been around a really long time, you'll remember that back in the 90s, they actually left inflation in for budget revenue forecasts, but not for expense forecasts. They pulled it back in last year. So again, looking forward, we might be seeing a deficit, we might not. So we don't like to say that there is, but it did kind of sort of chill the desire for spending. And that sort of brings me up to sort of some of the issues we worked on. Our three biggest priorities this year was one, trying to do something about the struggles that our EMS providers are facing across the state. Seeking $120 million in EMS aid, trying to get a bonding bill done, getting things for like clean water, child care, BDPI programs, and other local infrastructure. With the CGMC, with bonding, we really focus on the grant programs that benefit Greater Minnesota, but we're also supportive of helping, in general, helping make sure there's a bonding bill for our cities. We also were focused on pumping the brakes on new policy mandates. We kind of thought enough happened in 2023. So I'll talk about the three biggest things we worked on. The first was emergency medical services, and I know you folks are served by the Stevens County ambulance here, and I don't know what they've told you, but it's rough out there. And what we're seeing is, unfortunately, is that sort of what's, our providers are receiving, from insurance is just not matching the cost of providing services in many parts of the state. The operational expenses, capital, it's very expensive to be running one of these things, the capital required. And then for quite a number of them, they also have volunteer labor that's basically providing a subsidy. So what we're finding is in Greater Minnesota and a lot of places throughout the state, EMS is in trouble. And so we proposed a solution sort of in three phases. The first was an emergency cash infusion this year. And then sort of phase two, looking towards next session, trying to work on a sustainable funding mechanism. And then longer term, trying to start arguing or pushing for higher reimbursements. And it was something we did have, I would say bipartisan support on this. We worked with both Democrats and Republicans because it is a statewide issue. Introduced legislation that was heard in the House and Senate, tax committees, other committees. Ran into some resistance. DFL leadership in the House and Senate was a little resistant because, again, like I said, there was a concern that we might be facing a budget deficit in the out years. So persuading anyone to spend money this year was not easy. And then some of the other challenges we faced, the governor wanted to put money into it, but did not have the same vision in terms of in terms of how much money was needed. But at least, yeah.
Is the EMS, are they all government services, or are they local government services that we're talking about?
It's so, and I can't read my, so the government, so about with the EMS, slightly more than half are provided, are government. And then the rest, some of them are associated with hospitals, and then some private companies. So it's about half local government. The aid package we were pushing for was actually to benefit, all of them, and particularly focused on Greater Minnesota. So, because what we're seeing is, again, the medical reimbursements are just not meeting the costs.
So what's
Our
my question is, the private ones just charge more. I mean, I know that the medical isn't paying it, but somebody's got to pay for them to be in private business. You can't wait for the government to come in and subsidize that the whole time. I mean, or you just don't pick up. I mean, that's the problem I'm wondering about, why this is such a deal. I understand the government part that are run by the government, but the private ones, if I'm not making money privately going to pick people up, you're just going to have to stop.
Some people don't have the means either.
I would say like Medicare costs, like Medicare reimbursement. So they could charge this much, but Medicare's only going to cover that.
Well, I get that.
So it doesn't matter.
Right.
And then people are.
So at what point do the privates just tell the government, say, we're not going to pick them up anymore?
And that's actually what we're starting to see some concerns about that, and that's why we're working on this issue, is because even, again, I think Rebecca probably stated it more artfully than I did, is that Unfortunately, and it's particularly challenging in Greater Minnesota, and I may have to come back with some answers on this because, as everyone knows, I'm the wastewater girl. But but you know, the challenge is that particularly in Greater Minnesota, our populations are older. And so what happens is a lot of those reimbursements are getting paid for by Medicare. And so the private companies can be like, we're not going to do this anymore. And so then basically we are leaving, grandma at the side of the road after an accident with nobody picking them up. And
Well,
I think
guess
that's yeah.
That's my prompt to
Yeah.
the VFL or whoever, I don't care whose side it is on.
Mm-hmm.
The prompt to them is, if you don't, privates, they're going to go on to something else to support their families. I mean, you can't just run your business into the ground just because somebody needs this service. You have to go on. And that's my question to the government. You have to keep them in business or they're going to go away.
And that is exactly what we were trying to do. And so the package that we got, again, we did not get as much as we had hoped, but we did get some. And so we got a pool that was about $33 million. $9 million of that is for some pilot programs trying to, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll send out the full EMS team on calls that may not need it. And so they're going to be piloting in a number of different places across the state, both rural and metro, trying to do it with smaller teams. But then $24 million is going out to the providers. So Stevens County Ambulance, I did have, it's on my phone. I had Eric look it up. It's somewhere between like $150,000 to $200,000 that they're receiving again to help. But the challenge is getting the Medicare reimbursements up, which is a federal issue. Which we don't do a lot of federal stuff, but we will be. We will be working and leaning on that issue. In the short term, what we are trying to do is stop the bleeding.
The insurance companies are the ones that are not paying up.
Well,
Is that my understanding?
it's
So then the state government comes in and makes up the difference for it. So why would the insurance companies ever want to come up if they stay there and they force the state government to come in and subsidize it?
Yeah.
They're just going to come in and pay for it, so that'll bring them up to a level. So why do we ever have to come up to that level?
Well, just to clarify, even though our business is called Stevens County Ambulance Service, it's actually privately owned by the Fishers, as you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and in talking, Beck and I both visited with the Fishers, Randy and Josh.
Yeah.
The problem, one of the challenges you have is some people, Brian, don't have insurance. And so when you go out to a call, you have the same expense, whether they can pay you or not.
Absolutely. I totally understand that.
How do you that's really one of the challenges, because you'd be surprised how many people don't actually have insurance. They don't have the ability to pay for the call.
And so, but it's not the private. I would say is that I can't speak for every private insurer. It's not the failure of private insurance to be paying, because a lot of the customers either A, as the mayor said, don't have insurance, or B, are on Medicare, which is federally funded insurance. So that's government insurance for folks who can't afford it, or they're seniors. And that's who a lot of the calls are to. And so that reimbursement rate is set by the government. So we're kind of squeezed in between this. There are some other sort of root causes, but it is pretty complex, but it is sort of more generally sort of a, I guess, again, wastewater girl here, but it's sort of like a choice that we have to make as society is, are we going to, because I think there is sort of an expectation and there may be a regulation that, they have to provide that service.
So the federal government sets the rate for the insurance companies? Is that what I'm understanding?
For Medicare.
Oh, for Medicare.
And so what happens is, again, because of
Yep.
particularly because of the elderly and poor populations in Greater Minnesota, which is why it's hitting our communities harder, that they're just not getting enough funding for it. If you want to have, I could actually have you.
No,
Eric,
that makes a lot
Okay.
more sense, because it's somewhere along the line the government had to control something, and that was that. So
Yep.
okay, that makes it clears it up for me.
Okay.
Hopefully it clears up for anybody listening about why why
They
you're
can charge
maybe
you
you're
for
having
one,
a
but they're still
problem.
gonna
So what's the plan to
reimburse.
come up with the shortfall? I mean, there was obviously a shortfall. If anybody in that industry knows that they were asking for a lot more, and they got, they're asking for this much and they got this much.
Yeah, so we asked for $120 million. I mean, you always ask big. We got, again, the $33 million, and so that's being distributed. Stevens County, and Eric did flag for me that it is private, is receiving, again, I've got the number on my phone. I want to say it's somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 of that pot is going to them to help sort of compensate for that, unpaid costs. But we are also looking at, again, are there other ways that we can try it from a policy standpoint? I mean, this session was like, if you think about it in medical terms, was like, let's put the tourniquet on and stop the bleeding. But once you stop the bleeding and get somebody further, then you got to start thinking about, like, am I stitching the arm up? I'm not a medical person, but, cast down or something. And so then part of it is also going to be looking at policy reforms because, there is, not unlimited pools of money. So there's this pilot program they're going to be trying out to try and look at, are there easier ways to solve some of these calls so it is not as expensive to go out at it, looking at some other policies that may be driving up costs. And so sort of short term, it is that funding to sort of, and we really worked hard to make sure that the majority of that went out to Greater Minnesota. And then again, going forward, we will be, this is a top priority going into the next session, both putting funding in there, but also working with groups to try and identify what are some of the policy changes we can be making. Because we really do think a two to three pronged approach is that. And then longer term, working with allies, on leaning on getting better, reimbursements.
Well, it's a critical service, and I think the seriousness of the situation needs to be. So I would encourage anybody that's listening out there to contact your legislatures because,
yes.
a lot of these services, they're hanging on by a thread. I mean, literally, they're hanging on by a thread.
Well, get to your national representatives, your Congress people and your senators that can get to the national, federal level, because that's where it needs to get to.
I mean, it is, we absolutely need to be it is a multi-pronged solution, and the Fed absolutely talking to the feds as well. I would note particular to the mayor and Rebecca, we are in the process of, I think it's going out next week. We are doing a survey to our members about EMS so that we can get a better sense of how it's impacting all of you and what we're going to be working on. So I urge you to watch for that because that is a big issue. And I think I covered, thank you for the good questions. Again, this was some of those things where, we worked hard both on getting the money and getting the funding formula so that it was spread throughout the state. I think the initial proposal, it actually went to only 2 portions of the state, and that obviously was not acceptable. And I think even if we did not get all of the funding we wanted, it is now something people are talking about and recognizing is a crisis. Which is, this is an issue. I don't think I talked about it when I was visiting you folks last year. I mean, this is something that has really popped up, and I want to say the person we have working on this at our office is Eric Simonson. Some of you may or may not know it. He's a former state legislator, but he was also deputy fire chief up in Duluth and an EMS, so he knows this issue intimately, and I couldn't pick a better person to have working on it. For Greater Minnesota. So we will continue. Again, we're going to be working both on those short and long-term solutions. So any other questions on that? Good questions. Thank you. Bonding. This is where I spend a lot of time. And you can kind of see, if you look closely at the report, you'll see not a great photo of me. I'm never putting my hair back in a ponytail for a hearing again. But it was a traditional year for bonding. But and the other thing I'll point out is that bonding is the only place where when you've got, the majority-minority split, it's the real place where the minority can have a voice. And so we were, that can always, that helps make it a more balanced bonding bill that serves both Greater Minnesota and the metro area. The state had a debt capacity of around $1 billion, and the governor came out with his proposal in January. They're required by a law to put that out there, and he was proposing slightly under that at about $819 million in GO bonds and another $169 in cash. Again, much smaller than we had seen the previous year, but we saw a bonding bill in 2023 because they didn't get around to passing one in 2022. So they're kind of off cycle, which is very frustrating for a lot of our communities. The governor's bonding bill really was focused on heavy state assets and very little set aside for local government, really was focused on the state this year. We had a number of proposals. Our biggest one, not surprisingly, if you know our work, is really trying to put more money into the Public Facilities Authority for water, because that is such a huge expense for our communities, putting money both into the normal wastewater and drinking water programs, but also into the longer term lead line replacement that is going to be done over the next 10 years. putting money into child care, infrastructure grants, and then the BDPI program, which is, again, a business development program that almost every one of our cities has taken advantage of through the years. Also working on policy stuff that had to do with wastewater and drinking water. If anyone has any questions on that, I can go way in depth, but I won't bore you with it otherwise. But I don't think you need me to tell you the bonding bill failed, and it was very, very frustrating. You asked me earlier how I was. You probably wouldn't have wanted to ask me that at the end of May because I was not in a happy mood. But there were unfortunately a number of different factors that went into that. I think, honestly, there was a little bit of a hangover, for lack of a better word, from last year's bonding bill. Last year's bonding bill was big. It needed to be. Again, when you go for 3 years without having one, there are state assets and state programs that need to be, paid for. But the challenge is, particularly, with newer legislators, they're like, we just did this. Why do we need to do this again? We need to do it again because, again, particularly with the state assets and grant programs, it is, wastewater keeps wearing out. We have pipes bursting in places. And Lord knows what that's going to look like after all the flooding we've had across the state this year. So there was that. There were quirks of the legislative calendar. This year, rather than having most years, Easter and Passover fall within a week of each other, so they have a 1-week break. This year it was spread out, so we had like a 3-week break, and I'll be honest, that starting and stopping made it a little bit more challenging. And then there was that news we all woke up to on the Monday of Passover break, hearing about a legislator getting arrested up in Detroit Lakes, and I'm not going to kid you, that really threw things off. We didn't see any work done for about the next week and a half in the Senate, and I think that really exacerbated the sort of partisan debate, whatever you want to call it, the partisanship in the Senate, and sort of that and some other issues taking priority really made it hard to get a bonding bill done. I'll be honest, after that sort of news of the Senator Mitchell arrest happened, a lot of, we pushed hard, continued to work on it until the very last minute. But I think a lot of us felt like that really took the wind out of the sails. It was one of several issues, but it was really complicated. So no bonding bill. We will be and are already starting on it, pushing for a bonding bill for next year. But we really need to get back on cycle so that we need to work together more and get back on cycle on that. The final issue from a bigger standpoint that I'll point out is something, the other big issue I spent a lot of time on, and this was the housing and zoning reform. And you may have heard about this. We've seen sort of a beating drum over the last couple of years. We know we have a housing crisis throughout the state, but it looks a little bit different everywhere you go. In some places they don't have the land to build. In other places, a lot of places in greater Minnesota, our challenges tend to be that it costs the same to build a house as it does in the metro area, but you can't sell a house here like you can in the suburbs there. And so there's just a lot of different challenges. But there was legislation that was introduced trying to tackle, they 2 years ago put $1 billion into housing, and that's starting to spread out and filter through the system. This year they decided to tackle housing by policy, and they wanted to create more housing in the state by increasing density and also do things like address climate change through land use and address historical race-based zoning practices. And I'll be honest, there are a number of different versions of the bill that floated through, but kind of the ones that got introduced would have required cities to allow up to 8 housing units on a land that was set for single-family housing, allow accessory dwelling units by right on most residential properties, and allow multifamily housing to be built in commercial areas. It also included restrictions on parking minimums. Now, some of those ideas, one thing, there was even an article in the Star Tribune the last week that said, cities really oppose this stuff, but they're doing it on their own. And I'll be honest, that was kind of our point throughout most of session, is that land use reforms of different types may make sense in a lot of places, but it needs to be done by the cities, because the land use and zoning that you need in Morris is probably going to look different than my neighborhood where I live in St. Paul. And it's going to look a little bit different than what they need in Alexandria or down in Winona. And so, it was something that was initially supported, honestly, both by Democrats and Republicans for different reasons. We testified in opposition. Again, we were very concerned about these proposals and worked behind the scenes on trying to amend the bill. Again, our biggest concern is that a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't make sense, particularly for greater Minnesota. The House passed in a very watered-down version of it, but it died in the Senate, surprisingly due to suburban opposition. But we do fully expect this issue will be back in 2025, and we're already trying to talk with the housing chairs. They have voiced a commitment to listen to us because we know that changes need to happen. But again, decisions like zoning work better when they're made at the local area because you have a better sense of whether or not we can fit an 8-plex on your block and whether the infrastructure can support it and what your parking restrictions should look like. And so we will continue to push on helping cities solve the problems themselves. Just a couple other priorities we touched on during the session: local sales tax. There has been a moratorium on new and renewing local sales taxes that will be in place, honestly, through next June. There was some attempts at getting legislation done on that, but the House tax chair and the Senate tax chair were really far apart, and they got about this close. We all worked on it. Even I ended up working on it because of Parks and Trails, but it's something we're continuing to push on. My colleague Shane's been very involved on that. There was some language that was pushed forward that would have required prevailing wage in all TIF projects. That was pulled out, but we can expect to continue to see that. We worked on issues having to do with transportation projects and greenhouse gas. And then one other thing that I ended up having to spend a lot of time on is that there was I would call it a well-intended but not well thought out proposal regarding bonding that would have required cities and any local government, not just cities, counties, anything who got bonding money to establish a replacement fund with the state that would cover the cost of replacing anything that you received any money from the state from, and have that money sitting there. And yeah, exactly. That was my reaction when I read the bill first. It was, again, the idea was there seems to be this perspective that there are some cities out there that aren't taking care of their assets and aren't doing this or that, which I'll be honest, for the cities we work with, I don't think that's true. But sometimes they come up with a solution that's like a hammer rather than a scalpel. And so we got the bill working with the author narrowed down significantly by the end of session, but no bonding bill, no policy. It might come back depending upon who's chairing the bonding committee, but we at least, I think, have persuaded many people at the legislature that our local governments are responsible and this isn't necessary for most of them. So that was the other big thing. Looking ahead, as you probably know, we have an election coming up, which will have an impact on what things will look like next year. Every House seat is up for election. You're the first people I visited since the primary. One thing we were kind of watching is that there were, I think, 6 incumbents, House members who had primary challenges, but all but one of those actually made it through, because that would have had an interesting impact. There's also going to be a Senate special election, and so that could have an impact on who controls the Senate, and then obviously we have a presidential race, and that could also impact our state in ways that I had not anticipated had you asked me about it in June. One thing we will be doing, we're actually putting the finishing touches on it. We think it's important to early and often be reaching out to the people who will be representing us, and we put together a candidate packet for our legislators, kind of explaining the issues we work on, and it'll cover things like EMS and housing and things like that. We do send a link to it in our CGMC in brief, so if anybody wants to read it, they can, but we do try early and often to educate legislators on these important issues. So, any other questions?
What was the governor's problem to allowing the cities to authorize their own local sales taxes?
I mean, it wasn't the governor. It was actually, it's more, well, it goes way back. Let me try to think of it. But basically, there are different legislators have mixed feelings about local sales taxes. And if you go back to the 70s when local government aid was created, they kind of did away with virtually all local sales taxes except for Duluth. So I don't know how they got around that. Powerful legislators. But because what they did is they created local government aid. And so local government aid, the theory is that not every, Alexandria is going to raise more from a sales tax than, say, a town like Bagley or something like that. So different cities have different tax bases, different amounts of commercial. You look at somebody like Waite Park that is like practically all commercial, they could probably make a lot more through a sales tax than somebody that's heavily residential. So the idea was originally we should not be, sales tax are regressive, so we don't want to do it this way. There are some legislators who still continue to hold that view. There are other legislators who are more pragmatic and are just like, okay, we're not keeping up with local government aid and other things. We should if cities want to vote to tax themselves, we should let them do it. So, and it is an issue, I would say, that sort of cuts across ideological boundaries as well, that it's not, because there are some, I would say you see Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the issue. And so the Senate tax chair looks on them more favorably than the House tax chair does. Because, again, she thinks they're regressive. And so they just could not come together on what it should look like. So 2-year moratorium on them, it would come back. And then after that, because like right now, if you have a sales tax you want renewed or you want to institute a new one, you can't even introduce a bill. I mean, you could introduce a bill. Nobody's going to, chain your legislator up, but both tax chairs have said they won't hear them. That will change in the 2026 legislative session. But again, it's just sort of this general concern about, some people feel, I don't know, there's different views on different sides. There's concerns about, from some folks on the left, that they're too regressive, from some folks on the right, that we don't want to be taxing people anymore. So again, you have political objections on both sides. So I would suspect we will see, I don't know if we're going to see a solution or not this coming year, but the moratorium expires next year. So either way, back in 2026, I fully expect, regardless of what happens, we will be seeing a lot more cities requesting it because, again, local government aid hasn't kept up. Expenses have gone, obviously we will continue to push for more local government aid because we think that that's a good way to deal with it in greater Minnesota.
The formula stays pretty much the same, doesn't it, for calculations of local government aid?
So we
That's the constant, right?
So it stays constant-ish. So we look at it about every decade. And so that is one of those things that we actually keep an analyst on staff to work through that. So we redid the formula, I think we tweaked it last year. There hasn't been a ton of changes, and I don't think the factors affecting Morris have changed that much, but our bigger push over the last X number of years was to get more money put into the program. And again, for those of you who've been on the council for a while, you may remember for a while the goal was getting it back up to the 2002 level. We hit that goal, but then we've been pushing for more because that wasn't indexed for inflation. And so we came very close in 2023 to getting it getting the index to inflation there. But again, that sort of concern about the out years and a potential deficit, they said, we're just going to increase it and come back, and you guys can come back and find another year. So that will be, I don't know what our exact plan is because we're in the process of doing our proposal, but quite frankly, it wouldn't be the CGMC if we weren't out there on the forefront fighting for more LGA.
If they're concerned about a futuristic deficit, why did they spend the surplus?
That's probably a philosophical question. I think what they did is they spent one-time money would be their response, and they also did one change we have from what you would have seen again back sort of like around 2010 and earlier is that we do have a much higher budget reserve. So there was also, in terms of spending down that surplus, a bunch of that was put back into the reserve. Again, some of you, depending upon how long you've been here, may remember back 2010 and earlier, we were not talking about increasing LGA. We were talking about fighting off on allotment. And so they have put more of a reserve in there, and so that's where part of the funding has gone to. So.
I don't know how you do it, quite honestly. And I kind of goes without saying that. Thank you for your frustrations must be many.
Yes.
Thank you for the hard work.
Oh.
Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it again. Like I said, Morris has been just one of our longest time members, so always great to see you. Just as a reminder, CGMC conference, fall conference, always a popular one, should be interesting post-election discussion. That'll be in Alexandria, not far from here, November 21st, 22nd. Legislative Action Day is February 12th. Would love to see you at any of those. And we will be sending out notices either later this month or actually I think later this month. We are always looking for more people on our committees. Watch for the EMS survey, and then in September, I do the annexation and land use lobbying, so I will be doing a land use survey as well because I want to know what you guys are doing on zoning and land use vis-a-vis housing. They just wouldn't let me send it out this month because EMS gets to go first. So, but thank you. Great to see you all.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, we shall move on. We have no public hearings tonight. We will move on to our July 23rd, 2024 reading and approval of our regular meeting minutes.
I make a motion to approve the 7/23/24 regular meeting minutes.
I will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve our July 23rd, 2024 regular meeting minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we have the condensed version of the minutes from July 23rd, 2024 as well.
I'll move approval of the condensed minutes from July 23rd.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the condensed version of the minutes from July 23rd, 2024. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We shall move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the audit of city bills, pay estimate number 3, North Sun Construction LLC, the June 26th, 2024 tree board minutes, the June 9th, 2024 tree board minutes, the gambling reports, and then we have an application for exempt permit from Assumption Church, and a Morris Transit report, and a raffle license report. And I guess I can move on the items on the consent agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. I will bring it back to the council for discussion on any of the items on the consent agenda. Earlier noted, I think we had the transit report way up from year to date, so that's good. Any items of discussion from the council? Okay. All right. We had a first and a second to approve the consent agenda. I guess all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have petitions, requests, and communications up next. We have a change order for the Morris Transit Garage, and I think I will bring it over to Becca, and you can bring us up to speed and just speak to those changes.
Yeah, so there was 3 there. One came in this week too, so you'll have another one at the next meeting. But so the first one was a change order in materials, changes from an insulated panel to a standard reverse panel. That change to the project was $24,960 to the negative. Change order 2, we added $4,499 to the project for painting the wash bay columns with epoxy, and then to wrap the old columns with a material to match the new building. And then change order 3 was $10,566, and that was for furniture. So in doing our walkthrough, this was something that was going to be on our cost. We had Brian from MnDOT there with us. With the change in panels and the decrease there, he said it would be best to have North Sun put together and pay for, and we just do a change order to pay them for furniture, and then that would be included. So this one is for the cabinets. You'll see one at the next meeting for like a fridge and some other fixtures that were added also. But they can now, those were supposed to be out of pocket. With the change in the first one, we're able to be under the contract and able to put those back in.
You want us to just deal with each of those changes individually, or do you just want them all lumped together and accept them as
I
is?
think either way you
Just-
do it.
We'll just do them all at one time, if that's okay with the council.
Yeah.
Makes sense? Well, if you're gonna spend that kind of money and spend the money, you wanna have some decent in furniture. I guess it was kind of, makes sense.
Change order in our favor is kind of nice.
Yeah.
The fact that we can lump the furniture in with some of these other change orders, like you mentioned, it's great to see, right? So with that, I will make a motion to approve the change orders for the Morris Transit Garage.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the change orders for the Morris Transit Garage. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have no ordinances and resolutions tonight. We shall move on to the city manager's reports and recommendations.
Yeah. So, first thing on there is the sidewalk assessing. It was on there last time, but I bypassed it for some reason. So, I was asked about, if we had a program to assess sidewalks that need to be redone. So, if sidewalks need to be redone, it's the homeowner's responsibility to replace them. We haven't done that in the past. We'd have to figure out where startup dollars were coming, or if we were gonna put them in like next year's budget and start it next year. We did have a meeting with MnDOT today, our district engineers, and they said, that some of the Safe Routes to School funds have been used for sidewalks. So we could look at possibly trying to get, grant dollars from there for sidewalks, which just opened, he said yesterday, closes in next month, I think. So we have a little bit of time to try and see if we could get funding for that way. But before I went too far into how we want to do this, or what we wanted to, how we would put a policy together, kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were. If we want to start doing a program where we assess sidewalk costs.
It's not the first time we've had this conversation. You know, we've talked about it many times about,
What is
And we always-
bringing this to the forefront? Is somebody asking about
Someone
it?
had asked, yep.
Okay. Well, when somebody asked last time, we spent, what, $100,000 and trimmed off all the edges all over town, and was it 50,000 a crack twice, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
well, and I think if, what we've done in the past also, and not saying we can't change, but when we work on a street or an improvement on a street, we give the homeowners the opportunity at that time to have their street done, and of course, it's at their expense, but if they can't afford it, we can assess it to their taxes, and, you know, they always have that option also, so that's kind of how we've handled sidewalks in the past, but,
Only on a project area though.
Jay, you want to say
I'd like to
something?
speak to this because, I'm Jay Fear. I worked on this stuff for about 40 years here. We used to always assess for sidewalks. For many years, we assessed for sidewalks. We actually ran projects in town where we would go out and ask people if they wanted to get their sidewalk fixed in certain parts of town. For example, we did all of 4th Street going up to the university campus about 25 years ago. They signed a petition. We ran a contract, and then we assessed them 100%, plus 20% for engineering costs. So there is a long history of assessing for sidewalks in town here.
How long ago did that disappear, Jay? It went away
I don't-
somewhere?
I
Well, I've been
believe it's
retired 6
disappeared,
years.
is it?
I've been retired 6 years, and I would say a few years before that, when there was the question about increased valuation for the property and whether we would end up going to court, as we did a couple times. And so we took that, I shouldn't say we, it was an executive decision to take that out of an assessment. But we had a long history of it. And we used to do mud jacking. I mean, this grinding of sidewalks, you can see if you walk around, they hold water like crazy now. So anyway, if you have any other questions, I'd be glad to fill you in. And Becca, sometime I can run you through the past.
Okay.
Thanks, Jay, appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion from the council on that, or otherwise we can,
I just don't, I mean, if you don't assess for the sidewalks, what are you gonna do? Let them deteriorate more? I mean, that's kind of where we're at. We either assess or
She's not coming that way.
they, yeah. fall and crumble and somebody falls and gets hurt and then the homeowner's sued anyway. So, I mean, that's the level that it would go to if we're not fixing up our sidewalks.
Yeah, and you know, like
But they're not our sidewalks.
just the devil's
Well,
advocate
fixing
here.
them and then assessing back the homeowner. I think we're just talking about assessing them. What are we talking about?
Yes.
Just going around and saying your sidewalks need fixing.
How does that assessment get spread out though?
That's where we can see
That's the
kind of,
question.
that's where we can
That's
see
the question.
what other.
Again, I can
what
speak
other
to that. We used to
places-
do it over an 8-year period. We would allow them to pay it off or else put it on the taxes for 8 years. That was the way we did it for years
And
ago.
it's just for the said properties.
So the
that
city
had to
would
re-
pay it and then we would assess it over an 8-year period.
And
if
it
they
just
could pay it out
affects the
anytime,
people that actually have to
100%
repair
if they
them.
would like to.
With a nominal interest,
Yeah, interest.
3%, 5%.
Yeah, whatever it was, we changed it from year to year.
Yeah, whatever we can borrow the money for.
Right.
I'd have no problem with us trying to set up a fund and put a pool in there of whatever, I don't know what an average sidewalk project is, but if somebody wants to replace theirs, if we could get a pool with 200,000 or 300,000, if we can borrow that type of money and try it and see where it goes, but if people wanna make the improvement and to do it on a 6 or a 8 year with a slight increase over what we're borrowing money for to the property owner, to do that, if we can assist them, we wanna have our town be
Right.
sidewalk or walker friendly for people to get around and
Yeah, just to play the devil's advocate on this, of course, you know, the people that have just, you know, gone through, we'll just talk Sixth Street here, you know, those homeowners all got whacked pretty good for, you know, theirs. And I know we worked with them somewhat to help bring that cost down, but, you know, they all paid for theirs up front and,
so they're gonna be paying 100% for this, as I'm proposing. If we borrow the money and if somebody wants to do it, we're gonna assess them the total cost plus interest.
if
So
we have to
if
borrow
I've
the
done
money
it,
though, that's
part
gonna
of the
affect
project.
everybody then, right?
If any of these things, any of the sidewalk is deteriorated because of trees in the boulevard, it's our responsibility. So, I mean, there's gonna be some additional costs for us on a lot of these sidewalks.
Potentially.
Yes. You know, and so that's been one of my deals is we're doing new projects, we should not be putting trees in the boulevards to further down the line have problems with sidewalks that we're going to assess to homeowners have to pay for that. I have a problem with that. But how about tourism money? You know, you can't tour the city with bad sidewalks.
Not an
I think
authorized.
That's too great?
I think that's
That'd be
a
a
stretch
stretch.
with how to
Is it-
use that,
oh, come
those
on.
It'd be a
dollars.
bit of a stretch, I think.
It was coming out okay.
Good
Like,
try.
you know, can't
Well,
tour
I-
it without doing it.
I
Nice
will
attempt.
look at kind of how we could look at funding something like this and then kind of what others are doing.
or an approximate cost on a 50 or
Yeah.
75-foot lot, what it would cost, a ballpark figure for
Mm-hmm.
a 3-foot sidewalk, whatever the standard is.
Yep.
And we're not gonna replace their entire sidewalk, just the tree portion that's damaged. So we'll do that section or two up by your tree, but you're gonna pay for the rest of it.
But then we have to also look at some of the policies of what communities are going up to, because there's a lot of places in town there are different,
Communities.
that where I'm getting built, that I don't have a sidewalk out where I live. There's no sidewalks. You know, there's no sidewalks up on Hillside. There's no sidewalks where I live.
There's not in my
We
neighborhood.
do have a
either.
few stretches where there are
You know,
no
there's
sidewalks,
there's
but
places that have been developed and there's sidewalks were not put in.
And we had some meetings and discussed this,
Yeah.
especially your neighborhood, and everyone in that neighborhood was in favor of getting sidewalks until we said, if you want a sidewalk, you're gonna get assessed for it, and all of a sudden that 100% support went to 100% opposed to it.
Yeah.
Because if you're gonna pay for it for us, we'll do it, but if I have to pay for it, no, I'm fine with walking out in the street, so, yeah, I mean,
I think that we should look into how we're gonna proceed somewhere down the line, but I think we have a lot more pressing issues in our city than our sidewalks.
Moving on to the airport, so, last week, Friday, Tom, who was our airport manager, Jim Nealand and Jim Langman, we went to 4 different airports to look at their arrival departure bill dates. We will be working on our next big project. I attached the CIP for the airport. is that arrival departure building out there. So we kind of looked for ideas, what we liked, what we didn't like, as we go next year into the design phase of this. I have reached out to all members, except one I haven't heard back from for the airport board. So once I either get a hold of him or can't get a hold of him, we'll just set a date and get the airport board together just so they can kind of go over what we've come up with for our capital improvement plan. It's been approved by the FAA, and then kind of where we sit. So it's kind of the airport. The transit bus garage, we are nearing completion on that. Our walkthrough date has been changed from the 27th on your sheet to the 29th. So getting close to being done with that. With some of the changes in the furniture, it might not be quite complete by then, but pretty close. We had a Green Corps member this year. Cameron was our Green Corps member. The last day that she will be here is August 16th. Cameron's worked on the tree inventory, did a stormwater report, put together numerous education materials, and participated in the tree board discussions and volunteered in the community. So Cameron's been wrapping up all of her projects that has been worked on, and we'd like to say thank you to the Green Corps and Cameron for having someone help us work on our tree inventory and looking at our stormwater system and getting together all these pamphlets for trees, emerald ash borer, and rain gardens. Union negotiations started this week. We had both unions came in today to give their first proposals. So we'll meet again in October, beginning of October. We will have, as long as the work comp study gets complete, at our meeting on September 24th, we'll have someone from ABDO here to go over what the findings have been in that study. So they kind of wanted to wait until their wage proposals until after we get that wage and comp study back to them. So September 24th, ABDO will be here to discuss that. There was, with cannabis, there was an informational webinar from the Office of Cannabis Management last week. I wasn't able to attend that, so Whitney sat in. I have to rewatch the recording. She said there was quite a bit of information that we would want to think about and consider. Sounded like a lot of it talked about wanting to just, have cities designate their to the county. So I'll see what the recording kind of talks about and bring some information at the next meeting. I haven't seen the recording come back out to us yet, so yeah. The filing period that closed yesterday, we had 4 people who have put their names in to the ballots. We have Annette Watson, Kim Gullickson, Zach Krales, and Cam Erickson that have all applied for council. I'll pass around the 4-H. The 4-H kids this June did a service project where they painted 9 storm drains to educate people on water quality and kind of what should go down storm drains. So they thanked us for allowing them to do that. And then last year we did an informal in-house utility rate study, which we saw a big increase in our water rates. With that, we did put in money into the budget for an actual utility rate study done by Ehlers. This will look at water, storm, and sewer. We do have a little bit of money coming in for storm because we do have the MS4 reporting that we have to do, but we also have some stormwater issues that we need to look at. How are we going to maintain these issues and pay for these issues? So with this utility rate study will kind of show us, are we on track with our rates? What do our rates need to do? And how they need to look in the next 10 years. So once that is done, Ehlers will be here to present that too. And that is all I got.
Any questions for our city manager on her report? Hearing none, we should move on to the mayor and city council board updates. Would anybody like to start with sharing anything from their various boards that they sit on?
Mine are next week.
I just, we had a chamber board meeting yesterday, and as you all know, the Crazy Days, we had a Crazy Days Lazy Nights. The entertainment portion, the evening entertainment portion was canceled due to the weather. They have rescheduled the evening portion to September 17th. That's a Tuesday. So they'll have some entertainment, Clueless, whatever, Balloon Twister, he's gonna be there, and have some music, so mark that on your calendars, September 17th. That's about all I had on the chamber board, but anything else from the council on that front? Hearing none, we shall go on to other business. We have 2 items. First one is a recap of earlier closed council meeting. Becca, do you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, so the city council had a closed session to discuss sale of real property, a parcel 2018-27-000, portion of Skyview Park, and parcel 20-0058-010, a portion of Chiswick Field. Just talked about the possibility of selling property.
I think that's a pretty sufficient recap. Thank you for that. Next up would be the setting a date for the performance review for our city manager. We do a semi-annual review, so we'll have to ask council to pick a date that works for everybody, and we'll do it. When would be our next month with 3 meetings? We could maybe do it, or should we do it on a separate night?
It's not
than
until
that?
October.
Not till October.
So September 10th, we're already staying late to do our budget talks.
All right.
So we could either do a closed session on the 27th or the 24th after the meeting, unless you wanted a different date.
Unless you wanted to come in on the 17th is the night of that stuff at the park, but I'm not, what's the council think, I guess? It's up to you guys.
24th, after our meeting.
I'm good with
I
that.
can't see it's gonna take 2 or 3 hours. Hopefully
Right.
we get it.
In
24th
September?
of
24th of September.
24th of
That'd be
September.
our second meeting in September after our council meeting.
Just don't bring anything too confrontational to that meeting.
It will be easy on you. I think that should work. So we'll set that then, 24th, after our regular meeting. All right.
24th.
I think we're moving on here. We got informational items. I don't have any. Anything else to come before the council? Hearing none. Meeting adjourned. What I'd like to do is maybe just take a 5-minute break, if you guys want to use the bathroom or anything, and then we'll get on to our tonight's presentation. You must be Tori. Nice to meet you finally, Tori.
Yes, it's good to meet you.
Yeah. I know you and I have talked on and off for, yeah, it's probably a couple of years.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, yeah, I was gonna say, finally seeing you in person after
Yeah.
kind of a longer talking
Yeah,
online.
well, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
It's a beautiful drive to Telstra, right?
Do you want me to hook up
Yeah.
the presentation?
Yeah, if you're able to.
Yeah.